Tonight's lecture, reading, and discussion with the Israeli writer Etgar Keret, the fourth in a year-long series titled Creative Matters, is sponsored by the Office of Vice President for Research. And so I wish to begin by singling out for special thanks Dan Reed, whose support for the arts and humanities is crucial to the life of our community. Creative Matters, which brings together artists, writers, and thinkers to discuss creativity, grows out of the Arts Advancement Committee, convened by Provost Barry Butler and Dean of the College of Liberal Arts and Sciences, Chadin Jalali, co-chaired by Alan McVeigh and Chuck Swanson. Our charge was to synthesize energies, forge connections across disciplines, and spark new ideas in conjunction with the rebuilding of our arts campus. The flood of 2008, which wreaked such havoc, has inspired a building boom, which we hope to match in a variety of artistic and intellectual ways. Creative Matters is the brainchild of David Geer, George de la Pena, Ann Ricketts, and Leslie Weatherhead, to whom I owe a great debt of thanks. This event would still be in the dreaming stage absent their efforts. Finally, thanks to Jerry Sorkin and Hillel, who broached the possibility of bringing Etgar Keret to campus and then worked overtime to make it happen, including driving to the airport, making us eat outside on the last somewhat warm night of the fall. Etgar Keret is the author of many books of short fiction, including The Bus Driver Who Wanted to Be God and Other Stories, The Nimrod Flip Out, The Girl on the Fridge, and Suddenly a Knock at the Door, as well as an acclaimed work of nonfiction which came out this summer, The 7 Good Years, a memoir that begins with the birth of his son in a hospital given over to dealing with the victims of a suicide bombing, and ends with the death of his father, a Holocaust survivor. His work has been translated into over 30 languages, adapted for scores of films, including Wrist Cutters, a love story, and frequently performed on NPR on selected shorts and This American Life. He has been awarded a Chevalier in Arts and Letters from the French government, and a feature-length film that he made with his wife Shira, Jellyfish, won the Camera d'Or at the 2007 Cannes Film Festival. Here are some things that we can learn from Etgar Keret. First, his name means urban challenge, which is for the majority of us the story of our lives. As he has said, one must write with passion, abjuring the sterile, well-written stories that mark so many American creative writing programs. The more outlandish the premise, the more it must be grounded in concrete details. In this, he resembles the Italian writer Dino Buzzati, who said, quote, that fantasy should be as close to journalism as possible. The right word is not banalizing, although in fact a little of this is involved. Rather, I mean that the effectiveness of a fantastic story will depend on its being told in the most simple and practical terms, close quote. To this insight, Etgar adds slang, which is what lends his work a certain authority. He insists that he writes from tone, not content. Writing a short fiction, he says, is akin to surfing. If writing short fiction is akin to surfing, then tone is the equivalent of balance. But the engine of the story has nothing to do with plot, he says, just rhythm, which, of course, is what makes the world go round. Of the changing landscape of his homeland, where a taxi driver may tell him that he is worse than Hamas, he says, quote, that in Israel we're very used to people dying, but the concept of Jews killing Jews is a pretty new one. We're used to terrorism, but the fact that a Jew will kill a Jewish prime minister, the fact that people will come with a baseball bat and beat the shit out of left-wing demonstrators just because they disagree with them, the fact that people like me get death threats, it's not in our ethics. Think about it. This idea where in this safe haven for Jews, Jews will threaten to kill other Jews, it wasn't in the brochure. Etgar Keret's brochure, a body of work that will endure, is what we will celebrate and explore tonight. Please join me in welcoming him to Creative Matters.
Better now? Yeah. So I must say that this is a very, very special night for me because 15 years ago I was a member of the International Writers Program. Chris was already the head of the program. He played more soccer then. He was a bit quicker. For me, coming to Iowa City for 3 months was really maybe one of the most meaningful experiences, both in my life and in my life of my wife, who was then my girlfriend. And I think that it gave us this ability to kind of take a break from our everyday life and chores, and be here with 30 more creative people, and be excused, like to just talk about what we wanted, do what we wanted, think what we wanted to think, and it kind of opened the door in my mind that ever since was left open. So I'm usually not anxious and excited before events, but this time I am, and I'm really, really happy, to be with Chris on the stage. It's like being, I don't know, being with a teacher, with your teacher on the stage. So it's a very special thing for me. I try to pick up a couple of texts that would have to do with the topic of creativity. And I must say that because my latest book is a non-fiction book, I'm not saying that non-fiction is not creative, but when I had to think about creativity, it kind of sent me more to the direction of fiction texts. So the first story I wanted to read is a story that I've read here in Prairie Lights 15 years ago, because it's actually the first story I've ever written in my life. When I grew up in high school, I was a math and physics major, and my brother was kind of a computer genius. And everybody wants to be a little bit like his older brother, so I wanted to be a computer genius too. The problem was that I wasn't a genius, but I thought it was just a technicality, and that I'm going to get over that. But going to the army for a compulsive army service of 3 years changed something in me, and basically after having a very bad experience there, I found myself writing my first story. At the time, I was in a unit where we had to take 48-hour shifts. It was a computer unit, so basically during those shifts we were in a room that was very, very cold, no windows, no other people to be in touch with, and this kind of semi-meditative situation kind of got me to sit next to one of those computers and write a text which was very short. It was 1 page long, and I printed it out, and I waited for my first potential reader, but I had to wait something like 26 hours for him, because it was a soldier who was supposed to relieve me from my duty. And when he came, I said to him, listen, I wrote a story. It's the first time in my life that I written something. I think it is a story, but nobody had ever seen it. You want to read it? And he said, no, fuck off. So, so I took the printed page and I went to visit my older brother. And as I buzzed the intercom in his apartment building, he said to me that it was very early in the morning, because it was like around 6:30 a.m. And he said, like, you woke up my girlfriend. I don't want you to come up, but I'll come down and I read the story as I walk the dog. And he came down with his little dog, and the dog was very excited because nobody took him for walks that early. And just as the dog was contemplating how he's going to relieve his doggy urges, my brother grabbed the printed page from me and started walking, which caused the dog to lose his balance and fall on his side. And as my brother was walking, reading the story, he was dragging the dog on the pavement, and I immediately felt guilty. I thought, if not for my story, this dog wouldn't be going boing, boing, boing on the pavement right now. But luckily for the dog, my stories are very short, so a couple of blocks later, my brother stopped, the dog regained his balance and did what it wanted to do in the first place, and my brother looked at me, and I saw that my brother was crying, and he said to me, "It is so beautiful." He said, "I'm so proud of you that you wrote it." And I said, "Thank you." And he said, "Do you have another copy of it?" And I said, "Sure." So he bent down and he picked the dog shit with a printed page, and he threw it in the garbage. And I must say, I think like almost every reading that I give, especially if it has to do, if I meet writers, I always tell this story because this action of my brother, it changed my life, because as I saw him picking up the sheet with the printout of my first story, I realized that I want to become a writer. Because you know, big brothers, they always teach you lessons. You know, some teach you in a very kind of straight kind of way. My brother would always throw curved balls at me, but basically what I felt he was telling me, that the story was not in the paper. The story was already in him. That basically, that when you tell a story, you take something from your brain and from your heart, and you share it with another person, and you do it through a book. You know, so from that moment on, if before that I was very much against book burning, now I became against book burnings that people didn't read yet. But the moment that the book had been read, you know, then it was not needed anymore. It was like a pipe that, you know, that the water had gone through it to the other side. And for me, being in the army, kind of realizing that you can write something on a piece of paper, put it in your pocket, give it to somebody else, and once he read it, even if my commander will take it from him, tear it to pieces, burn it, or do whatever he would do, it cannot be unread. The moment that it was read, it was there. You know, it was imprinted into somebody's mind and heart. So I want to read that story. I wrote it 30 years ago, and it's called The Pipes. When I got to 7th grade, the head psychologist came to school and put us through a bunch of adjustment tests. He showed me 20 different flashcards, one by one, and asked me what was wrong with the pictures. They all seemed fine to me, but he insisted and showed me the first picture again, the one with the kid in it. "What's wrong with this picture?" he asked in a tired voice. I told him the picture seemed fine. He got really mad and said, "Can't you see that the boy in the picture doesn't have any ears?" The truth is that when I looked at the picture again, I did see that the kid had no ears, but the picture still seemed fine to me. The psychologist classed me as suffering from severe perceptual disorders and had me transferred to carpentry school. When I got there, it turned out I was allergic to sawdust, so they transferred me to a metalworking class. I was pretty good at it, but I didn't really enjoy it. To tell the truth, I didn't really enjoy anything in particular. When I finished school, I started working in a factory that made pipes. My boss was an engineer with a diploma from a top technical college, a brilliant guy. If you showed him a picture of a kid without ears or something like that, he'd figure it out in no time. After work, I'd stay on at the factory and make myself odd-shaped pipes, winding ones that looked like curled-up snakes, and I'd roll marbles through them. I know it sounds like a dumb thing to do, and I didn't even enjoy it, but I went on doing it anyway. One night I made a pipe that was really complicated, with lots of twists and turns in it, and when I rolled the marble in, it didn't come out at the other end. At first I thought it was just stuck in the middle, but after I tried it with about 20 more marbles, I realized they were simply disappearing. I know that everything I say sounds kind of stupid. I mean, everyone knows that marbles don't just disappear. But when I saw the marbles go in at one end of the pipe and not come out at the other end, it didn't even strike me as strange. It seemed perfectly okay, actually. That was when I decided to make myself a bigger pipe in the same shape and to crawl into it until I disappeared. When the idea came to me, I was so happy that I started laughing out loud. I think it was the first time in my entire life that I laughed. From that day on, I worked on my giant pipe. Every evening I'd work on it, and in the morning I'd hide the parts in the storeroom. It took me 20 days to finish making it. On the last night it took me 5 hours to assemble it, and it took up about half the shop floor. When I saw it all in one piece waiting for me, I remembered my social studies teacher, who said once that the first human being to use a club wasn't the strongest person in his tribe or the smartest. It's just that the others didn't need a club, while he did. He needed the club more than anyone to survive and to make up for being weak. I don't think there was another human being in the whole world who wanted to disappear more than I did. And that's why it was me that invented the pipe. Me, and not that brilliant engineer with his technical college degree who runs the factory. I started crawling inside the pipe with no idea about what to expect at the other end. Maybe there would be kids there without ears sitting on mounds of marbles. Could be. I don't know exactly what happened after I passed a certain point in the pipe. All I know is that I'm here. I think I'm an angel now. I mean, I've got wings and this circle over my head, and there are hundreds more like me. When I got here, they were sitting around playing with the marbles I'd rolled through the pipe a few weeks earlier. I always used to think that heaven is a place for people who've spent their whole life being good, but it isn't. God is too merciful and kind to make a decision like that. Heaven is simply a place for people who are genuinely unable to be happy on earth. They told me here that people who kill themselves return to live their life all over again, because the fact they didn't like it the first time doesn't mean they won't fit in the second time. But the ones who really don't fit in the world wind up here. They each have their own way of getting to heaven. There are pilots who got here by performing a loop at one precise point in the Bermuda Triangle. There are housewives who went through the back of their kitchen cabinets to get here, and mathematicians who found topological distortions in space and had to squeeze through them to get here. So if you're really unhappy down there, and if all kinds of people are telling you that you're suffering from severe perceptual disorders, look for your own way of getting here. And when you find it, could you please bring some cards? Because we're getting pretty tired of the marbles. Thanks. And the other thing that I wanted to kind of talk about, you know, like using my reading as an excuse to talk about it, is basically, I've met a creative writing student today, and I think that we touched it a little bit when we talked about this idea of why do we write and what's the function of stories and books in our world. And I think that everybody sees books or stories in a different way. You know, some people, I don't know, use them to pass a message to the world. So some of them use them, you know, to reconcile with the world. You can do many things, and I thought to myself that the reason that I write, the way I write, has a lot to do with the bedtime stories I was being told as a child. My parents are both Holocaust survivors, and my mother had lost her parents, both her parents and her brother, all her family, when she was a young child. And one of the strongest memories that she had from them were the bedtime stories that they would tell her in the ghetto. And in the ghetto, they had no access to books. So they would make up bedtime stories for her every night. And when she became a mother too, she decided that she would do the same. Both my parents were very literate people. Each of them read in 6 languages. Our apartment was full of books, but we had no children books at all. Because for my mother to read to us from a children book was like to give us a McDonald's for dinner. It's what a lazy parent does. Everybody can do that. You can go to a store, you give them $10, they give you a book, you read from it, you know. But a parent who really loves his child has to prepare a fresh new story each evening. And she would do that with great ease. She would tell us stories, with everything needed from a fairy tale, leprechauns and fairies and witches. But sometimes she would have to work late or she wouldn't feel so well. And then my father would have to tell me the bedtime stories. And we didn't have children book at our home. And my father, who was a very good storyteller and very charismatic, had no ability to make up stories. He just didn't know how to invent them. So what he would do, he would tell me things that had happened to him in his life as kind of a bedtime story. And those stories were strange, because they didn't have any fantastical element in them. And even like the narrative arc was somewhat dodgy. But because like when I would say, and then this and this happened, I say, why? But he said, because that's how it happened, But in a strange way, they compared me even more than the stories that my mother would tell me. And sometimes I would kind of yearn that she won't be home at times, so I get to hear one of my father's stories. And I think that the thing that those stories had, that they would always tell stories of people who were not the nicest people who did stuff that, that it was very difficult to defend. And in some way, even in the bedtime story, I didn't feel that my father was defending it. But at the same time, he had this kind of beautiful way of humanizing their actions. So it would be stories about people who do strange stuff, but it's told in such a voice that I could understand those people, and I kind of wish them well, even though they didn't deserve it, And I think that there was something about these stories that kind of made me believe that this is the role of stories, that it's there to advocate for humanity without beautifying it, to tell us kind of not so nice stories, but in such a way that we understand that our protagonists are human beings, that they come from a human place. And the story that my father told me, they always had one thing in common. They always took place in a whorehouse, and the protagonists, they were always drunk people, mafia guys, and prostitutes. And as a 5-year-old, when I asked, my father, what's a prostitute? And he said, oh, it's somebody who gets paid to listen to other people's problems. And then when I asked him, what's a mafia guy? He says, oh, well, it's somebody who collects rents from buildings that he doesn't own. And what's a drunk? It's this guy who has these medical conditions, and the more liquids he drinks, the happier he becomes, And even before I went to elementary school, I already had kind of a future dilemma, if when I grew up, if I want to become a drunk prostitute or a drunk mafia guy. But when I was about 10, I realized that the stories that my father was telling me were not appropriate for children. And I kind of confronted him about it, and I said to him, why did you tell me these stories? And my father openly said to me, listen, I don't know how to make up stories, so I thought whenever you'd be in bed, I thought I'd tell you a story from my childhood. But then when I started picking them, I said, what story should I tell you about how me and my parents, we hid 620 days in a hole in the ground, which was too shallow for us to stand in and too narrow for us to lie in. And when the Russians liberated our town, we couldn't move our muscles and had to be pulled out. Or maybe a story how the Nazis caught my sister and tortured her to death, but she wouldn't tell where I was hiding. So he said, it didn't seem right to tell a 5-year-old a story like that, So I kind of fast-forwarded in my life, and I thought maybe the story about how I came to the country of Israel, believing that, that this would be a place I could live in, but was caught by the British who ruled the country and sent me to a refugee camp. And I said, no, I tell you that you start crying, So I would keep forwarding my life until I reached the part that after being sent back to Europe, I joined the Irgun, which was an underground that fought the British, and they sent me to buy weapons from the Italian mafia. And when I was buying these weapons, I didn't have any money of my own, so I would sleep in public parks until one day the mafia people they said to me, you can't do that because it makes us look bad. People see us doing business with you, and then you sleep in public parks. You know, we, the family, we don't do business with homeless people. And I explained to them that I don't have any money. They said, you know what, we have an idea. We own a whorehouse. And you know, and business are very good, but you can always find you know, a clean bed there, and you can put your head there and sleep. And he said, and I lived there for 8 months, which was the first time in my adult life that I didn't have to hide the fact that I was a Jew, that I would have full night's sleep without waking up in fear. And he said, you know what, this I could tell as a story. And he said, you know, and the people I met there were not the nicest people, but compared to the Nazis, you know, they were saints, you know. And it was something as if the experience that he began his life after being in the Holocaust kind of made him very forgiving toward mankind. He knew that even when people go wrong, they could go much more wrong than that, you know. So I think that there is something in that it became kind of the inspiration for all my writing, and I wanted to read a story that in a very associative ways kind of connected to my father and his bedtime stories. And the story is called What Animal Are You? The sentences I'm writing now are for the benefit of the German public television viewers. A reporter who came to my home today asked me to write something on the computer because it always makes for great visuals. An author writing. It's a cliché, she realizes that, but clichés are nothing but an unsexy version of the truth. And her role as a reporter is to turn that truth into something sexy, to break the cliché with lighting and unusual angles. And the light in my house falls perfectly, without her having to turn on even a single spot. So all that is left is for me to write. At first I just made believe I was writing, but she said it wouldn't work. People would be able to tell right away that I was just pretending. Write something for real, she demanded, and then, to be sure, a story, not just a bunch of words. Write naturally, the way you always do. I told her it wasn't natural for me to be writing while I was having my picture taken for German public television. But she insisted. So use it, she said. Write a story about just that, about how unnatural it seems, and how the unnaturalness suddenly produces something real, filled with passion, something that permeates you from your brains to your loins, or the other way around. I don't know how it works with you, what part of your body gets the creative juices flowing. Each person is different. She told me how she'd once interviewed a Belgian author who every time he wrote had an erection. Something about the writing stiffened his organ. That's the expression she used. It was probably a literal translation from German, and it sounded very strange in English. Write, she insisted again. Great, I love your terrible posture when you write. The cramped neck. It's just wonderful. Keep writing. Excellent. That's it. Naturally. Don't mind me. Forget I'm here. So I go on writing, not minding her, forgetting she's there, and I'm natural as I can be. I have a score to settle with the viewers of German public television, but this isn't the time to settle it. This is the time to write things that will appeal, because when you write crap, she's already reminded me, it comes out terrible on camera. My son returns from kindergarten. He runs up to me and hugs me. Whenever there's a television crew in the house, he hugs me. When he was younger, the reporters had to ask him to do it, but by now he's a pro. He runs up to me, doesn't look at the camera, gives me a hug and says, I love you, Daddy. He isn't 4 yet, but he already understands how things work, this adorable son of mine. My wife isn't as good, the German television reporter says. She doesn't flow, keeps fiddling with her hair, stealing glances at the camera, but that isn't really a problem. You can always edit her out later. That's what's so nice about television. In real life, it isn't like that. In real life, you can't edit her out, undo her. Only God can do that. Or a bus if it runs her over. Or a terrible disease. Our upstairs neighbor is a widower. An incurable disease took his wife from him. Not cancer, something else. Something that starts in the guts and ends badly. For 6 months she was shitting blood. At least that's what he told me. 6 months before God Almighty edited her out. Ever since she died, all kinds of women keeps visiting our building, wearing high heels and cheap perfume. They arrive at unlikely hours, sometimes as early as noon. He's retired, our upstairs neighbor, and his time is his own. And those women, according to my wife at least, they're whores. When she says whores, it comes out natural, like she was saying turnip. But when she's being filmed, it doesn't. Nobody's perfect. My son loves the whores who visit our upstairs neighbor. What animal are you? He asks them when he bumps into them on the stairs. Today I'm a mouse, a quick and slippery mouse. And they get it right away and throw out the name of an animal. An elephant, a bear, a butterfly, each whore and her animal. It's strange because with other people, when he asks them about the animals, they simply don't catch on. But the whores just go along with it. Which gets me thinking that the next time a television crew arrives, I bring one of them instead of my wife. And that way it will be more natural. And they look great, cheap but great. And my son gets along better with them too. When he asks my wife what animal she is, she always insists, I'm not an animal, sweetie, I'm a person, I'm your mommy. And then he always starts to cry. Why can't she just go with the flow, my wife? Why is it so easy for her to call women with cheap perfume whores? But when it comes to telling a little boy I'm a giraffe, it's more than she can handle. It really gets on my nerves. Makes me want to hit someone. Not her. Her I love. But someone. To take out the frustrations on someone who has it coming. Right-wingers can take it out on Arabs. Racists on blacks. But those of us who belong to the liberal left are trapped. We've boxed ourselves in. We have nobody to take it out on. Don't call them whores, I rail at my wife. You don't know for a fact that they're whores, do you? You've never seen anyone pay them or anything, so don't call them that, okay? How would you feel if someone called you a whore? Great, the German reporter says. I love it. The crease in your forehead, the frenzied keystrokes. Now all we need are an intercut with translations of your books in different languages, so our viewers can tell how successful you are. And that hug from your son one more time. The first time he ran up to you so quickly that Georg, our cameraman, didn't have a chance to change the focus. My wife wants to know if the German reporter needs her to hug me again too. And in my heart I pray she'll say yes. I'd really love my wife to hug me again. Her smooth arms tightening around me as if there's nothing else in the world but us. No need, the German says in an icy voice. We've got that already. What animal are you? My son asks the German, and I quickly translate into English. I'm not an animal, she laughs, running her long fingernails through his hair. I'm a monster that came from across the ocean to eat pretty little children like you. She says she's a songbird. I translate to my son with impeccable naturalness. She says she's a red-feathered songbird who flew here from a faraway land. So I think, I don't know, I always, in Douglas Adams, when he talks about the many things you can do with a towel, you know, that he said, like there are about 150 things you can do with a towel. You can tie it to your head as a turban. You can use it as a whip to hit flies, you know. And so I think that the same goes for stories, because when you talk about creativity, they have so many functions. You can tell a story for so many things, like you can tell a story to protect somebody you love, you know, like here you can lie, you know, just to do it. You can tell a story to promise somebody that there's a better place. You can tell a story to advocate somebody that it's difficult to advocate, you know. I think that every person who does something that he likes, he thinks that he's doing the greatest, most fun things in the world. But I think as a writer, I'm no exception. I really think that writing stories and reading stories is really great.
It makes me think in your memoir you have this wonderful little story toward the end where you and your wife and son are driving, and suddenly the air raid signs go off, and there's a terrorist attack, and you get out on the side of the road, and you decide to play a game, I think called pastrami.
Yeah.
Maybe you could tell us about
No,
that.
the thing is that I think the book is very much about family, and I think that all the dilemmas in the books are dilemmas that everyone all over the world knows, you know. But I think that in Israel it's just that it's on a slightly louder volume, you know. It's the same problem. So everybody knows these kind of things, that when you tell your kid to do something and he refuses, you know, and you want to be nice, but at the same time he has to do it, you know. And so I was with my child when he was 7, and it was the first time there was a missile attack when we were outdoors. And what they said is that you have to lie on the ground, and you have like 30 seconds before the missile hits and explodes. And my wife lied on the ground, but my son refused to lie on the ground, and his argument was, if it's too dirty for me to eat from it, then it's too dirty for me to lie on it, because he had a popsicle and the popsicle fell, and we didn't let him eat the popsicle from the ground. And like, you know, and you don't want to scare him even more, because it's a very scary situation. You don't want to shout on him, but you know that you have something like 15 seconds, you know, before it will be too late. So kind of by survival instincts, then I said to him, how about we play pastrami sandwich? And he said, what's that? I said to him, mother is a piece of bread and I'm a piece of bread and you're the pastrami. So you lie on mommy and I lie on you, and we make a sandwich. And we did that, and you know, and then the missile exploded and nothing happened. And as we got up, my son suddenly became sad, because he liked the game, and he said, what if there will be no more missile attacks ever, and we'll never get to play this game again, you know? So it was really, but like, you know, that's the difference between me and my wife. I immediately reassured him. I said, don't worry, at least will be 2 or 3 more, you know. But my wife said, you know, we can play that with no missile attacks, you know, whenever you want, because she's the smart one, yeah.
Or more literal-minded?
More, yeah, more liberal-minded.
So, you know, one thing I wanted to ask you about, the genesis of Pipes, the first story, follows hard on the heels of a personal tragedy, and maybe you could say something about how that came to be.
Yeah, again, you know, I really love doing events overseas, because except for Chris, I don't know anybody here, so I can allow myself to be sincere, because, and Yael, but so when I do these events in Israel, I have to lie, you know, but here I can be honest, you know.
I'm just remembering when you moved into an apartment, your father asked you how the apartment was, and you said, I have the most beautiful view. And you said, but I didn't have a view. I couldn't help myself but lying.
Yeah. I think, lying, it's like in the story when I say something else. But so the truth is that when I was in the army, then my best friend who served with me sank into depression, and basically at some stage I realized that he was about to kill himself, and I was unable to stop him, and he killed himself. He shot himself next to me, where like he died next. He was dying. I took him to the hospital. He died later, and I think that there was something about me that I think that when somebody close, I always know this phenomena when people would hear that he committed suicide. They'll ask what was the reason, and the reason that people ask that because they want to see the difference between them and the person who committed suicide. So they said, like, was he crazy? Did his girlfriend dump him? Was he unemployed? You know, they want to find this kind of, to pigeonhole it in such a way that it won't threaten them. And I knew that the reason that he killed himself was very existential, you know, and I knew that I couldn't find anything to tell him to stay alive, you know. I couldn't come up with this kind of a trump card or winning argument, and there was something almost threatening in it, because I understood that I could either kind of alienate myself, cut myself from him, or be in a danger that I kill myself too, you know. So I think that the motivation to write this first story was kind of a way to advocate life, because I think in the story Pipes is basically a story about the saying that, you know, if your life is horrible, then there must be a way to get to somewhere where your life makes sense, you know. And I guess, you know, protagonist, he builds those pipes, but for me those pipes were the stories, you know, that I felt that through stories I can connect to myself or to a place in which I could actually survive.
There's a sense of you being something like a vessel with those pipes too, that the story is going to be coming through you. Is that your experience?
Well, I always feel that the stories are the vessels that will take you to a place, you know? That basically that when you write a story, because with me, I think always when I live life, I'm kind of over stressed to experience what actually going on. You know, it doesn't matter if it's good or bad, you know, it's always, I kind of have this hindsight understanding of the emotional experience I've been through. And when you write a story in the safety of fiction, you know, you can just be. And I think that there is something about fiction that I find very liberating. You know, I being son of Holocaust survivors and kind of growing up in a home where you know how much your parents suffered, then basically I think that the first instinctive wish that I had was that my parents won't be sad anymore. So when they asked me what I wanted, then all the answers I gave carried the subtext that I don't want them to be sad anymore. So when they asked me what I wanted, I would say what I think that would make them happy if I said. You know, if I would say, I want to learn how to play the piano, you know, it didn't matter if I did. And when you live this way very quickly, you tend to forget what you want. And then writing, suddenly you are in this kind of safe place where the stuff that you do doesn't have any consequences. You know, you can punch all the people who annoy you, and you can make love to all the people who attract you, and you can just be. So it becomes this kind of a lab for your emotions and your feeling. You know, in this book, Shira, my wife said to me that it bothers her that there are so many stories about married husbands who cheat on their wives. And I said to her, would you rather that I write about loyal husbands and cheat on you? Because there is something about these things that, you know, that let's say if those desires exist in me, then my default would be not to acknowledge them. I wouldn't even tell myself that I want to be with other women, but when I write, I can tell myself that, and actually, I have many stories about people who cheat on their wives, but none of them becomes any happier by that. So when I write these stories, there is something kind of liberating. You know, you can think your thoughts through. And I must say that before I started writing, I started very badly, and I think that in hindsight, I started because whenever I wanted to say something, I felt that saying something was basically like throwing a stone, you know, in a ceramic store. You know, it's like that. If I say a sentence, you know, it could hurt somebody, it could make somebody cry, it could start a war. And so it was like as if I was driving with the handbrake pulled up. You know, I just saying something seemed too much. And kind of when you write, there was something through writing that all those kind of things that I felt that were totally illegitimate, then suddenly people read them, and when they told me we like the story, it meant that we know what you're talking about, you know. So there was it was as if like the entire world, you know, it became this huge AA meeting, you know. It's like everybody hugged me and said, you know, yeah, we're the same, you know, it's tough for us too, you know. We're better than you in not showing it, but we know that it's hard, you know.
So when you moved from writing these stories in which you're free to do anything, then you decide to write a nonfiction book. Is there a difference in the approach, and do you feel the same kind of freedom when you're writing nonfiction?
Well, I must say that writing nonfiction for me was a very kind of a big surprise, because all my life I tended to patronize people who wrote nonfiction. Like secretly, I was very nice to them, but I said, "Oh, here are people who can't make up a story, so they write up a story that somebody else is responsible for. Yeah, good for them, you know. Yeah, maybe one day if I fall off my bike, you know, and hurt my head, I'll start writing nonfiction too, you know." So I never had this desire because I think that the thing I like the most when I write a story is actually the fact that I never know the ending of my stories. Like, you know, when I write a story like Pipes or What Animal Are You, I think that the strongest incentive that I have to keep on going is that basically I want to know what's going to happen next, you know? So it's basically like this idea of somebody who reads a story and realizes that if he wants to know what's going to happen next, he has to write it. So I kind of write it unconsciously while reading it curiously. And my metaphor for it is like when you see cartoons and you see somebody kind of running off a cliff and he uses a pencil to continue kind of drawing the land so he won't fall, you know. So it felt like this. When you write nonfiction, the thing that killed me is that you know what's going to happen, you know. So what's the point? It's like if you could choose either kind of going out on an adventure or retelling adventures that had already happened, of course you would like to go on a new adventure. But I started writing those pieces literally the day that my son was born. The first piece is about the birth of my son. And I think that there was something about the fact that there was a kind of a human being there looking at me and trying to understand what the hell was going on by seeing what I do, that made me very reflexive. Like I had the wish to look at myself from the outside too, you know, because first and foremost, so I won't fuck up as a father. So I wanted to understand, you know, what was going on. And also there was something in this kind of gaze or this kind of look that when I looked at myself from the outside, I said, whoa, there's so many things that I don't understand, or so many things that you know, that I can't defend myself from doing. I think I told you that story, but when my son was about 3 or 4 years old, we went to a restaurant, and I found myself getting to a fight with the waiter, and he was really rude, like, you know, and things didn't work, and I kind of got really angry, and I yelled at him, and I asked to see the manager, and the manager came, and I explained to the manager, and the manager either thought I was right or just thought that I was kind of a crazy man and didn't want to mess with me. So he said, you're right, and they gave me as a compensation ice cream. And when we walked home, my son said to me, Father promised me that whenever we go to a restaurant, you shout at the waiter, because when you shout at the waiters, they give us ice cream, you know. So there was something about the parental experience that all my life I've been shouting on waiters and getting ice cream, and with feelings that I was getting the moral high ground, you know. I felt like I didn't, like I was doing it, you know. But suddenly you have a son and you say, he sees it for what it is, you know. You humiliate people to save $7, and when they give it to you, like suddenly you're content. You say, okay, justice had been done, you know. I got a milkshake for free, you know. So there was something about this kind of reflection that I thought, you know, maybe if I could write those pieces, I wouldn't need my son to get them wrong, you know, for me to get better. Maybe I could just put them on a page and have some kind of an outside perspective on them.
Do you think we could hear one of them?
Yeah, for sure. So maybe, should I read the first one? Yeah. Suddenly the same thing. I just hate terrorist attacks, the thin nurse says to the older one. Want some gum? The older nurse takes a piece and nods. What can you do, she says. I also hate emergencies. It's not the emergencies, the thin one insists. I have no problem with accidents and things. It's the terrorist attacks. I'm telling you, they put a damper on everything. Sitting on the bench outside the maternity ward, I think to myself, she's got a point. I got here just an hour ago, all excited with my wife and a neat freak taxi driver who, when my wife's water broke, was afraid it would ruin his upholstery. And now I'm sitting in the hallway, feeling gloom, waiting for the staff to come back from ER. Everyone but the 2 nurses has gone to help treat the people injured in the attack. My wife's contractions have slowed down too. Probably even the baby feel this whole getting born thing isn't that urgent anymore. As I'm on my way to the cafeteria, a few of the injured roll past on squeaking gurneys. In the taxi on the way to the hospital, my wife was screaming like a mad woman. but all these people are quiet. Are you Edgar Keret? A guy wearing a checked shirt asks me. The writer? I nod reluctantly. Well, what do you know, he says, pulling a tiny tape recorder out of his bag. Where were you when it happened? He asks, and when I hesitate a second, he says in a show of empathy, take your time, don't feel pressured. You've been through a trauma. I wasn't in the attack, I explain. I just happened to be here today. My wife's giving birth. Oh, he says, not trying to hide his disappointment, and presses the stop button on his tape recorder. Mazel tov. Now he sits down next to me and lights himself a cigarette. Maybe you should try talking to someone else, I suggest, as an attempt to get the Lucky Strike smoke out of my face. A minute ago, I saw them take 2 people into neurology. Russians, he says with a sigh, don't know a word in Hebrew. Besides, they don't let you into neurology anyway. This is my 7th attack in the hospital, and I know all the shtick by now. We sit there a minute without talking. He's about 10 years younger than I am, but starting to go bored. When he catches me looking at him, he smiles and says, too bad you weren't there. A reaction from a writer would have been good for my article. Someone original, someone with a little vision. After every attack, I always get the same reaction. Suddenly I heard a boom. I don't know what happened. Everything was covered in blood. How much of that can you take? It's not their fault, I say. It's just that the attacks are always the same. What kind of original thing can you say about an explosion and senseless death? Beats me, he says with a shrug. You're the writer. Some people in white jackets are starting to come back from the ER on the way to the maternity ward. You're from Tel Aviv, the reporter says to me. So why did you come all the way to this dump to give birth? We wanted a natural birth. The department here... Natural? He interrupts, sniggering. What's natural about a midget with a cable hanging from his belly button popping out of your wife's vagina? I don't even try to respond. I told my wife, he continues, if you ever give birth, only by cesarean section, like in America. I don't want some baby stretching you out of shape for me. Nowadays, it's only in primitive countries like this that women give birth like animals. Yalla, I'm going to work. Starting to get up, he tries one more time. Maybe you have something to say about the attack anyway, he asks. Did it change anything for you, like what you're going to name the baby or something? I don't know. I smile apologetically. Never mind, he says with a wink. I hope it goes easy, man. 6 hours later, a midget with a cable hanging from his belly button comes popping out of my wife's vagina and immediately starts to cry. I try to calm him down, to convince him that there's nothing to worry about, that by the time he grows up, everything here in the Middle East will be settled. Peace will come. There won't be any more terrorist attacks. And even if once in a blue moon there is one, there will always be someone original, someone with a little vision around to describe it perfectly. He quiets down and then considers his next move. He's supposed to be naive, seeing as how he's a newborn, but even he doesn't buy it. And after a second's hesitation and a small hiccup, he goes back to crying.
Edgar, this has been a wonderful night. Edgar's books are for sale outside. I'm sure he'll be happy to answer some questions for you out there and sign the books for you. Please give him a big round of applause.
Thank you.